Good morning. It's 7 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster. And the first details of the Queen's speech revealed and the new laws coming our way. But what about the government's promise on social care? Well, the Health Secretary Matt Hancock is on the programme shortly. We'll also ask him about what's next in our roadmap out of lockdown. Plus, the Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy is with us as the Israeli-Palestinian unrest escalates. Now, also for you this morning, with international travel about to open up, we'll be joined by the Estonian president, where vaccine passports have been rolled out, and the Greek tourism minister to ask if they'd be ready for British tourists in June. And foodie alert, the celebrity chef Tom Kerridge joins us to discuss how lockdown has actually changed our eating habits. It's Tuesday, the 11th of May. Rocket fuel. The government promises big changes as the first details of the Queen's speech are revealed, but there are questions about plans for adult social care. Calls for calm from world leaders as Israel launches airstrikes against Gaza following a Palestinian rocket attack. Police charge a 21-year-old man with the murder of the police community support officer, Julia James. And fans first. We look ahead to tonight's Brit Awards, which will be the first major music event in the pandemic to have a live audience.
And low pressure dominates the weather this week, so showers or longer spells of rain continue, but not as cold as last week. I'll have the details for you later in the programme.
Well, very good morning to you. The government is promising an emphasis on education and training in today's Queen's speech. The Conservatives are also expected to announce plans to reform the asylum system as well as the planning system in England. Well, let's have a look at some of the legislation expected in the Queen's speech today. The Prime Minister says the Skills and Post-16 Education Bill will act as rocket fuel for his levelling up agenda. The law will give every adult access to a flexible loan for higher level education and training. The government will bring forward the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, which was shelved last session due to violent protests over the powers it would give officers in England and Wales to shut down demonstrations. Legally binding targets to help tackle climate change will be introduced in the Environment Bill ahead of the UK hosting the COP26 summit in Glasgow later this year. Measures to overhaul the asylum system and deter people from crossing the Channel are expected in the Sovereign Borders Bill. Legislation aimed at tackling voter fraud could mean we'll have to produce proof of identity in order to cast our ballots in the future. And the Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said a bill on adult social care was heading for the statute books by the end of the year, something Boris Johnson has promised reform on since becoming Prime Minister in 2019. Well, let's talk to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Good to see you this morning. And clearly levelling up is the big political push in this Queen's speech. But with that in mind, wouldn't a specific bill on adult social care be something that really would help level up parts of society?
Well, absolutely. The Queen's speech today will be jam-packed with bills, proposals to level up the country. And that's the mission of this government. And that's what we're going to deliver on. You listed a few of the areas where we're looking to legislate. I don't want to preempt the words of Her Majesty, of course, but across the board, across education, across health and social care, in terms of investment, these are the areas that we're absolutely determined to deliver on and make sure that the whole country can benefit as we recover from COVID. That is the goal.
But what is happening with adult social care? Because it is a critical part of society. We know it affects millions of people day in, day out. The Prime Minister, 657 days ago, said he had a plan ready to implement. Still nothing.
Well, of course, this is an incredibly important area, and we're committed to bringing forward reforms on social care. We committed to that in our manifesto, and we will be bringing forward a long-term plan for the reform of social care. Of course, the pandemic struck a year and a bit ago. and we've been totally focused on that. But as we come out of COVID, so we can return to delivering on those manifesto commitments that we've made.
So I mean, we don't expect it to be part of the Queen's speech then. So why, if it's so important, why not?
Well, you'll have to wait and hear what Her Majesty says, and you haven't heard what she's going to say on this or indeed any other subject. But what I can tell you is that we are committed to bringing forward a plan, a long-term plan for the reform of adult social care. We've seen the importance of social care through this crisis, and that has, in my view, strengthened the need for reform, the need for integration with the NHS, and we also need to legislate to strengthen the NHS so that the NHS can build back better from COVID as well. So across the board, in these areas that I'm responsible for and across government, we'll be delivering on the priorities on which we were elected and which will help us to level up and build back from this COVID crisis. And we're lucky as a country. We're good to be in a position where we can next week take further steps to release some of the measures that have been in place and really think with this Queen's speech today about what we need to do to build back better from COVID, to learn the lessons, for instance, of the success of the vaccination programme, and make sure that we can really deliver on the commitments that we made.
Yeah, we'll talk about the roadmap in a minute, if we may. Can I ask, why does the government think voter ID is a really important issue at the moment? Why are you pushing this?
Well, we've got a clear commitment to make sure that when people vote, we don't have fraudulent voting. It's perfectly reasonable to ask people to identify who they are before doing something as important as voting. That's yet another of our commitments that we've made that we're delivering on. And if you think about it, this government has a track record of delivering on our commitments. We got Brexit done, we protected the NHS, we're delivering on vaccination now, and the Queen's speech will be packed full of the bills that we will need, the legislative agenda, to deliver on those commitments that we made in the manifesto, and then what we need to do to get this country, the whole of the UK, coming back better from the COVID crisis.
I mean, look, there is some concern, and it's surely you would agree legitimate concern about some groups in society about not having the relevant photo ID at the moment. I mean, that's surely going to disenfranchise people, won't it? I mean, look, the figures say 47% of black people don't have a driver's licence compared to 26% of white people. I mean, there is a real danger, isn't there, that you could ultimately prevent sort of key constituents in society from having their say.
No, it's about fairness. It's about making sure that when people do something as important as voting, then they are who they say they are. And that we've piloted this, we've looked at it in great detail, we're committed to making it happen. And I think, people across this country want to know for sure that elections are fair, and this is just one measure to make the country a fairer place.
But apparently only 6 cases of voter fraud in the last election.
Well, I think that's 6 cases too many, and I think that you'll find there's very, very strong support for the principle that our elections should be robust. It's just one example of important changes to improve the country, to make it fairer, and then the broader levelling up agenda, which is absolutely at the heart of the Queen's speech, both in the areas I'm responsible for, in terms of the NHS. In terms of the investment that's going in, and in terms of making sure our asylum laws are fairer, for instance, right across the board, a whole series of measures all about delivering on our commitments. And, I'm acutely aware, and if you think about the elections last week, I'm acutely aware that many places in this country have been voting Conservative for the first time in many, many, many years. We've made commitments to people, and we're absolutely determined to deliver on those commitments.
Well, one of the commitments that has been made is obviously about what's happening next Monday, the next step out of lockdown. Things seem to be going to plan, which is which is very good news. But what about a bit of clarity on a few issues? First and foremost, the Prime Minister talked about giving people a cautious hug last night. What's one of those?
Yes, well, it depends on people's circumstances. So we will be changing the rules to be far more about people taking personal responsibility, exercising common sense according to their circumstances. And we've seen people behaving brilliantly during this pandemic when we've asked people to, and intervened in ways that we really would never want to in terms of the social distancing measures, in terms of some of the lockdown measures. The people have responded brilliantly, and that's one of the reasons that we're in the position that we are, alongside, of course, the vaccine rollout. When it comes to personal contact, it is much safer for two people who've had both vaccines more than around a fortnight ago. Them being in close contact is much safer than somebody who's been vaccinated and somebody who hasn't, or indeed than two people who are unvaccinated. And the approach that we're going to be taking from Monday is more based on personal responsibility. We will set out really clearly the risks. People understand the risks. We know that. We'll make that very, very plain, and then people can exercise their own personal responsibility. So, grandparents, sometimes for the first time in over a year, will be able to be close to their grandchildren. But, of course, taking into account the individual risk of catching this disease that people have, which differs according to circumstances.
So the advice would be, and I know this may seem like a small matter, but, people are desperate for a hug and a cuddle. If people haven't been vaccinated, then you would suggest not doing that come this Monday?
Well, if two people, neither of them have been vaccinated, then of course the risk of passing on the disease is much higher than if they have been vaccinated. I mean, that's one of the reasons that the vaccine programme is so important, is so brilliant, is that it gives that level of protection. And until now, we've had blanket rules across the board. But now what we're saying, with the prevalence of this disease so much lower than it was, that we think trusting people's personal responsibility is the right way to go, because those who are most at risk from the disease, most at risk of ending up in hospital or dying, are the vast, vast majority of them are vaccinated. Over 95% of over 50s are now vaccinated. And we know from the data published yesterday that if you've had both jabs, your chances of dying from COVID are reduced by 97%. These two things together, the huge uptake, which is down to people turning up, almost everybody over 50 has now been jabbed. It's absolutely wonderful, the way the public's responded. That, combined with the brilliant science, which gives this 97% protection from death if you've had both jabs more than a fortnight ago, the combination of these two things means that the most vulnerable are protected, so we can move to a principle of personal responsibility when we're totally transparent about the science of the risks, we're clear about what that means, we'll be publishing it in really simple terms, and then allow people to do those things that you were saying that people have been yearning for.
OK, where does that leave the mask situation then?
Well, we also set out the details in terms of masks. We are changing the rules in schools in terms of the use of masks, because we know that within school, wearing a mask in lessons, for instance, it means that the lessons it's harder to communicate, it's harder to teach. But in general settings, we're keeping the rules on the mask as they are for this step outside of schools. Mask wearing is one of those things that the cost of it to your personal sort of, going about your normal life is really, really small. We know that they are of benefit. That's one of the things we've learned. One of the things that scientists have developed the science on and learned during the pandemic. And so those rules will be staying the same, except for within school settings.
So the same up until... So there's a possibility, at least, that the mask rule, the mask mandate, if you like, could go in June. You haven't ruled it out?
Well, when it comes to we haven't ruled that out. When it comes to where we end up on social distancing rules and anything to do with certification domestically, for instance, for large events, whether that goes ahead, that will all be set out ahead of step 4. On Monday, we're taking step 3. And then step 4, as you know, we've said will happen not before the 21st of June. And between now and then, we'll monitor the data and those 4 tests that the Chief Medical Officer set out so clearly yesterday.
OK, you mentioned certification. Where are we with that? Because as you say, that maybe on the domestic front, that's going to come into play from June. But on an international travel front, that's going to come into play from next Monday. Is the app, it's meant to be all going onto the NHS app, is that going to be up and running by next Monday?
Yes, the certification, being able to show that you've had a jab, is going to be necessary for people to be able to travel. So we want to make sure people can get access to that proof, not least to show governments of other countries that you've had the jab if they require that in order to arrive. Israel's a good example. They've said that they'll want proof of you having had 2 jabs for you to go to Israel as and when they open up. They're on the green list, of course. So we will make sure that you can get access to that to prove that point. That is different to the question of whether we require people to be certified as COVID secure before doing things domestically. That is something that Michael Gove is working on, and we're looking at these pilots that are running. You saw that there was an audience at the Crucible for the snooker finals. The Brits are going ahead. We're testing different ways that this might work for large events, and then we'll be following the science on that. But really, the focus for the time being on this certification question is making sure that people can travel internationally and show that they've had the jab if that's what another country requires.
I'm sure your people at your end are telling you that we're almost out of time. I just want to very quickly ask you about the importance of vaccination. When are we going to move down to the 35-plus age group?
Yeah, pretty soon. We've gone down to the all 40s and above in the last couple of weeks. As you've seen, the numbers of vaccines is going gangbusters, more than 600,000 on Saturday again. And the number of first vaccinations is actually rising at the moment. And we're getting through all those critical second vaccinations. Really important, if you've got your second jab, then come forward at the time that you're asked to come forward. Everybody's doing it. It's absolutely fantastic to see the proportion of people, almost everybody, unless they've got some complicated logistical issue, or is coming forward for their second jab. It's so important. And we'll let you know as soon as we are able to take that next step to the under 40s.
OK, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
OK, let's talk to our political correspondent, Joe Pye. What do you think, Joe?
Pretty soon for the over 35s. I suppose that's good news. Sounds like that is imminent. Things I was interested in were on social care. Perhaps a hint that there will be more details in the Queen's speech. Didn't want to be drawn on this too much to prejudge what Her Majesty is going to say. We'll have to wait to hear what she says, he said. But this is a real priority for the government, or it has to be, especially the funding. We do not know how social care will be funded. Government departments can't really agree. We need to get the opposition, and government agreeing, because in the past there've been sort of political games. The Conservatives called Labour's plan in Gordon Brown's premiership a death tax. Remember Theresa May during the 2017 election, that was the dementia tax. They sort of do need to agree. On voter ID, interesting, he was saying that you put to the Health Secretary that there are 6 cases of voter fraud at the last general election. 6 cases are too many. It's about fairness. It's perfectly reasonable to ask for ID. This, though, Stephen, very controversial. The election system in this country does seem very fair, and it seems possible that millions of people are potentially disenfranchised if they don't have ID. Currently, you just need your name and address to vote. He didn't really explain what a cautious hug was, but I suppose it depends on your health risks, your vaccine status. And on masks, I think the message there is you have to wait and see, but possibly we could get rid of masks from the 21st of June. We've not ruled it out, Matt Hancock said.
Yeah. OK, Joe, thank you. Well, Adam Bolton's going to be presenting full coverage of the Queen's speech later this morning. That coverage starts at 10:30, bringing you all the news and analysis of what legislation is heading down the line and how it will affect you. Meanwhile, a member of the SAGE committee advising the government has warned next week's easing of the lockdown could lead to an increase in coronavirus cases. Professor Ian Boyd from St Andrews University said we should not become blasé. Well, this is the latest situation, and according to the latest figures, there have been 2,357 new cases of coronavirus. 4 more deaths have been reported, which brings the total number who've died within 28 days of a positive test to 127,609. Another 100,626 people have had their first vaccination and 187,171 have had their second. So that means 53.3 million injections have now been given out across the UK. Still to come for you this morning, the leader of the Liberal Democrats will be with us at 7:35 to tell us what he hopes to hear in the Queen's speech. And ahead of the speech and following the Labour reshuffle, we'll also talk to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy. That's at 8:05. And one of London's most famous theatres is this morning revealed what audiences will see when they return in a few months. Kate Varra from London's Old Vic will be with us at 9:45. Now, world leaders have called for calm after 3 days of clashes between Israel and the Palestinians. Last night, rockets were fired by Palestinian militants from Gaza, which was followed by Israeli airstrikes sent back the other way. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Alistair Bunkall, who joins us now. I mean, clearly there's real concern, Alistair, that this is going to continue to escalate.
There is, and I think one of the main worries now is that it has moved from street protests and the violence that we saw over the past few weeks, but particularly heightened over the weekend in and around the old city of Jerusalem, and it's escalated to a military level. And you are seeing both Hamas in Gaza firing rockets out into Israel, particularly worryingly targeting Jerusalem. That's the first time rockets have targeted Jerusalem for many years now. And in return, as you'd expect, the Israeli Defense Forces are retaliating. They've given a briefing early this morning saying that more than 200 rockets were fired from Gaza. Some of those fell short and actually exploded in Gaza itself, but some did hit targets in and around southern Israel. In return, the Israelis, as I say, have fired back using attack helicopters, drones, and airstrikes from aircraft. And they've been hitting targets that they say are legitimate Hamas military targets in Gaza. More than 20 have been killed in Gaza, including some children. The Hamas group say that civilians have been killed. The Israelis say they can't confirm or deny that, but they take every effort possible to make sure that civilian casualties are avoided. So where are we now? Well, there's no obvious flashpoint today, as there has been over the last couple of days, but we wait to see whether or not these retaliatory strikes will continue and whether or not the Israelis probably want to continue striking Gaza to make a point, and whether or not Hamas will continue to fire back.
OK, Alistair, for now, thank you. Now, also making the headlines for you this morning, and a 21-year-old man has been charged with the murder of the police community support officer Julia James in Kent. Callum Wheeler from Aylsham is due to appear in court today. The body of Ms James was discovered in woods 2 weeks ago. President Biden has said there's no evidence of involvement from the Russian government over a cyber attack that targeted the country's largest fuel pipeline system. A ransomware attack forced Colonial Pipeline to shut down on Friday, but it's thought a criminal gang was responsible.
I'm going to be meeting with President Putin, and so far there is no evidence based on from our intelligence people that Russia is involved, although there is evidence that the actors' ransomware is in Russia. They have some responsibility to deal with this.
Doctors in the United States have approved plans to give the Pfizer vaccine to children aged 12 to 15. Regulators called it a watershed moment in trying to bring the pandemic under control. The US television network NBC has joined the boycott of the Golden Globe Awards. The committee organising the ceremony has been criticised after it was revealed they'd not included a black member for 20 years. Tom Cruise has added to the backlash by returning the 3 Golden Globes that he's won during his career. Well, meanwhile, the Brit Awards will tonight become the first big music event in more than a year to have a live audience. About 4,000 people are expected to attend the show, which is part of a government pilot study. Claire Gregory reports.
The sight of crowds with no masks and no social distancing is now strangely unfamiliar. But the music industry hopes this won't be for long. Tonight, a 4,000-strong crowd will head here to the O2 to watch the Brit Awards, the first live indoor event of this scale in over a year. It's all part of the government's pilot scheme.
There will be no social distancing, so that's going to be, one of the best parts of tonight. The reason we can do that is because everybody coming to the event has to take a lateral flow test at an NHS-approved site and demonstrate that they've got a negative test result.
Data from a recent trial gig in Barcelona, where people didn't distance but did wear masks, showed no sign of higher rates of coronavirus.
This is the sound that we make.
Nominees hope tonight's show will help prove this can be done safely.
It's quite a privilege to be able to go and have this as a test event, and perhaps it kind of takes on a different importance for that reason. It's going to be really nice just to see people, and human beings are sociable animals, and it's been really tough for everybody being locked up. So it's nice to get a chance to go out and let our hair down for a night.
It's been a record-breaking year for women, making up 4 of the 5 Best Album nominees for the first time ever, a historically male-dominated category. This year's Rising Star winner hopes it's a sign of change in the industry.
It's exciting, but also it's about time, I think everyone's been waiting for it. So it's not like this year the Brits are just kind of given us courtesy, nominations for girls. It's actually just that girls are killing it at the moment and are writing incredible music. So it's about time that it is actually just recognised for what it is.
But no matter who walks away with awards, if tonight's ceremony means these eerily empty venues will soon be full again, the fans will be the winners. Claire Gregory, Sky News.
OK, let's see what the weather's going to do for you today. Morning, Naz. How are we looking?
Pretty much the same as the last few days. In fact, the same as last week. But the only difference is this week is not as cold as the previous one.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Low pressure dominates the weather this week, so we are going to continue with the unsettled theme of showers or longer spells of rain. But it won't be as cold as it was last week. In fact, this morning is slightly cooler than it was yesterday morning, not as mild as yesterday morning. So it's not a completely frost-free start. In some rural spots, there is a patchy frost, but for many inland areas, it's mainly dry. Over parts of Wales, though, and Western England, there are some showers, Southern Ireland too, and across central and western parts of Scotland, there are cloudy skies and patchy outbreaks of rain. Otherwise, it's mostly fine. Going into this afternoon, the rain across Scotland continues to move its way northwards, so becoming drier and brighter there. And across England and Wales, we're seeing swathes of showers moving northwards, so widespread showers in between dry and brighter spells, some of them heavy and thundery later, particularly across northern and northeastern parts of England. There may be the risk of hail later on. And there will be another area of showers across the southwest of Ireland, moving into the southwest of England and Wales, with the heavy downpours by the end of the day across parts of Wales as well. Winds will be strong across the southwest and across the far northeast. In fact, it's generally breezy everywhere.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we'll talk to the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Damien Green, as the government is expected to leave reform of adult social care out of the Queen's speech today.
There are things we all take for granted. As the rivers and tides flow, the sun will rise, the wind will blow, and the earth will spin. But are we now spiralling into a climate crisis which cannot be avoided?
No one can predict the impact that it's going to have.
Close to the peak here.
This is really the moment of truth. Expected to be hit very hard indeed.
What can be done to reverse the spiral? The Daily Climate Show on Sky News will look for the answers.
It's taken me a long time to speak about it. You become more comfortable the more you speak about it, I think, and it's helped my relationship, with my wife, and we're more open, and just talking helps, and helping each other out. Like you say, getting outdoors is very important for us as a family. That's why I teamed up with Miracle Grow to try and help encourage the British to get outside, to pledge to spend more time outside. You can just go to the website, which is lovethegarden.com. You get their wellbeing journal when you make a pledge, and it's full of recipes and lots of ideas to help and encourage people to enjoy some outdoor space. It's just something that is always in our life as a family. We encourage each other to get outside because it does boost your mood, and we find if we're indoors too long, we become too down, and it doesn't help with everyday activities, really. My wife jokes that she's lost me to a leaf blower, a hedge cutter, a lawnmower and a hose pipe, which I think is a bit of an exaggeration, but I find it very therapeutic. And I was watering the plants the other day, and I was busy, and I asked Frankie to do it, and she did it, and she was very surprised how much she enjoyed it. And it is just getting outside, even if it's for 10 minutes, can boost your mood. When we were homeschooling, it was, let's get the kids outside and do something for 10, 20 minutes, because it does help. I'm 40 now, but I probably wasn't open until I was 38, and I wish I'd been open before. I'm more open with my wife, so our relationship is better. We pick each other up a lot. And, I speak to someone professionally every now and again, and it helps. And they don't necessarily have the answers, but just getting things off your chest can help so much.
This is Sky News Breakfast. Now, the Health Secretary says the government hasn't yet ruled out changing the rules on masks next month. Lockdown measures on mixing households and socialising will ease next Monday. But speaking to us just a few minutes ago, Matt Hancock said the rules on masks could be relaxed when restrictions are reviewed again in June.
Mask wearing is one of those things that the cost of it to your personal sort of, going about your normal life is really, really small. We know that they are of benefit. That's one of the things we've learned. One of the things that scientists have developed the science on and learned during the pandemic. And so those rules will be staying the same, except for within school settings.
So the same up until... So there's a possibility, at least, that the mask rule, the mask mandate, if you like, could go in June. You haven't ruled it out?
Well, when it comes to... we haven't ruled that out when it comes to where we end up on social distancing rules and anything to do with certification domestically, for instance, for large events, whether that goes ahead. That will all be set out ahead of step 4. On Monday, we're taking step 3.
Now, so far, there's no indication the government will fulfil its manifesto promise to bring forward legislation on adult social care in today's Queen's speech. And I asked the Health Secretary whether or not it would be included.
We will be bringing forward a long-term plan for the reform of social care. Of course, the pandemic struck a year and a bit ago, and we've been totally focused on that. But as we come out of COVID, so we can return to delivering on those manifesto commitments that we've made.
So I mean, we don't expect it to be part of the Queen's speech then. So why, if it's so important, why not?
Well, you'll have to wait and hear what Her Majesty says, and you haven't heard what she's going to say on this or indeed any other subject. But what I can tell you is that we are committed to bringing forward a plan, a long-term plan for the reform of adult social care. We've seen the importance of social care through this crisis, and that has, in my view, strengthened the need for reform, the need for integration with the NHS, and we also need to legislate to strengthen the NHS so that the NHS can build back better from COVID as well.
Well, let's talk to the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, who also has some experience, actually, of being a carer. Good to see you this morning. Look, difficult, Matt Hancock being quite tight-lipped. I mean, not surprisingly, but are you expecting anything in the Queen's speech on this today?
Nowhere near enough. The government have promised time and time again that they'll fix the problem with social care, and they failed to deliver. We may hear a bit about integration, but nothing about issues around finance, nothing about issues around giving carers a break, nothing about issues about how we're going to make sure that the NHS understands that the care system is crucial. You know, if you care about the NHS, you've got to care about care. Surely the pandemic has taught us that. And what Liberal Democrats have been championing, we need to be on the side of carers, whether they're paid carers working in our care homes or going to people's homes, or whether they're the unpaid carers looking after loved ones at home, millions of them. And the government looks like it's going to betray those carers who played such a key role in keeping people safe during this COVID pandemic.
Do you accept, though, that the delay in bringing forward the legislation that Boris Johnson promised back in 2019, I mean, do you accept the excuse, if you like, that obviously there have been some other big priorities up until now?
No, I don't. There's been report after report about the solutions. Everyone knows where the issues are. The most famous report was by Sir Andrew Dilnot nearly a decade ago. And indeed, I managed to, with others, legislate for solutions, which the government then dropped. We had Theresa May's appalling plan, which was going to force people to sell their homes. And now the government have dithered and delayed. And meanwhile, millions of people are suffering. Millions of people aren't getting the care they need. Millions of families are having to sell homes, sell their assets because they're not getting the support that they were promised. And if Boris Johnson ducks this today and just tinkers at the edges with structural change rather than fundamental change, then I'm afraid Liberal Democrats will be voting against this Queen's speech. I mean, I'm concerned that what the Queen's speech seems to be saying about planning, which is going to make it a developer's charter. We need a community-led planning system, not a developer-led planning system. We can get the homes, but homes where the local people want, supported by new schools, by new hospitals, not a developer's free-for-all that the Tories seem to want. And there are other things that I really worry about this Queen's speech, but it'll be on social care. Well, Liberal Democrats are saying we're the voice of carers. People need to get behind carers far more after the pandemic. And when we talk about building homes that are needed, they must be community-led, not top-down like the Tories seem to want.
But I mean, as you've pointed out, I mean, this is an issue that successive governments have tried to tackle for many decades now. The problem is, as you talk about this huge structural change, is actually very difficult and potentially very, very expensive. There is no quick fix here, is there?
Well, actually, there's lots of ideas and lots of pilots and trials around the country. It's the lack of political will. And yes, there will be more money, and no one should move away from that. But surely if we're going to look after people and care for them and invest in our NHS and social care, as the government say they want to do, this is the moment to do it. And, we've seen great examples of local care sectors working with the NHS. The government just needs to act. And it's this delay and dither and failure to deliver on promises, which I think is really worrying people. And let's
Okay.
remember that there are prizes here. There's lots of people who are left in hospital for weeks and months, costing a lot of money, not good for their health or their well-being, when if they organise the care sector properly and we had that proper integration, that proper finance, then actually we could unlock those beds as well as giving people better care. The government are frankly incompetent as well as delaying.
Look, just before we let you go, just very briefly, I mean, it's really good to talk to you this morning, but you and the Liberal Democrats seem to have virtually disappeared from daily politics over the last 12 months. What's going on?
Well, look at the local elections. We had some really good results in key areas, whether it's Cambridgeshire, Oxfordshire, Surrey, Hertfordshire, Wiltshire, key areas that we need to win off the Tories at the next election, places like Stockport, Wokingham, Guildford. It was the Liberal Democrats who were taking seats off the Tories. People have been talking about the red wall in the north, where the Tories are winning seats off Labour. I think people should look at the blue wall in the south, where it's the Liberal Democrats who are taking seats off the Conservatives. And the results we saw last Thursday were really heartening for Liberal Democrats because, to be honest, if you want to see Boris Johnson out of 10 Downing Street at the next election, if you want to see the Conservatives beaten the next election, in many parts of the country, it's the Liberal Democrats who can deliver that for you.
Ed Davey, good to talk to you. Thank you. Well, let's talk to the Conservative MP for Ashford and the Commissioner of the government's social care green paper, Damien Green. Good to see you this morning. Look, are you frustrated that we have certainly no indication that there is going to be anything substantial on adult social care in the Queen's speech today?
Well, like everyone else, I'm frustrated that it's taken so long to get to this stage. I didn't expect the full details in the Queen's speech. The government produced a white paper on integrating health and social care a couple of months ago and said they would do it this year, which I took as a sign that they're going to do it with the comprehensive spending review that we get in the autumn. There's a certain sense to that, because that will set out spending figures for years to come. That's a more sensible time to do the detail than the Queen's speech, where you've got a lot of other legislation as well. But I am absolutely insistent that this needs to be the year for action and decision, rather than kicking the can down the road any further.
And what actually do you want to see happen? I mean, Ed Davey there talking about a sort of a comprehensive change to the system there. I mean, that has to be the case, doesn't it, rather than just tinkering around the edges?
It does. I mean, Ed Davey was talking about becoming the voice of carers. That's the sort of empty soundbite that doesn't advance the debate. I think you need to act, first of all, on funding. We need to find a way both to get more, if you like, public money in, taxpayers' money in, possibly through, people have suggested a national insurance surcharge, maybe 0.5% on national insurance for people over a certain age. Also, I think very much you should encourage people to save so that they can have some kind of insurance policy of their own for old age. But it's about money. It's not just about money. We've got to do something for the workforce. We've got to give them a proper career structure. We've got to change the way we house elderly people. We've got to build houses that they can live in for longer. We've got to use technology to enable them to stay at home for longer. So you actually have less time if you do need the percentage of people who need residential care, who need to go into a care home. We can reduce that with changes in housing and technology. So we need this kind of holistic approach rather than only concentrate on the funding, vital though the funding is.
Yeah, because we are. I mean, the Conservatives always sort of put themselves as the party of those who want to aspire, who want to save, who want to pass money down the generations, reducing inheritance tax, all these sort of issues. I mean, the problem is at the moment, anyone going into social care, or anything they may want to pass down to their children or grandchildren, just pretty much gets swallowed up in its entirety.
Yeah, exactly. And the Prime Minister was exactly correct when he said the one thing he wants to stop is people having to sell their homes. And the root of all this is that we all agree you have to spend more money on social care. We've got a slightly threadbare system now. Where that money comes from is why it's proved so politically difficult over the decades. The first Prime Minister to say we've got to deal with this was Tony Blair 25 years ago. It's been a very long-running sore. Now, So people have to accept that we are all going to have to pay some more money. How you do that is the key way. And one of the things you have to do is to say there is some kind of cap on the costs so that you won't have to sell your family home and give up all your wealth. For most people, that's the vast bulk of their wealth. Give up all of that so you've got nothing to hand on to your children.
But
now,
I mean, forgive me for jumping in, but I mean, when you mention, you know, certainly something, you know, a 0.5% increase for some people over a certain age on national insurance or some sort of insurance scheme that they can join, that may well be a sensible way forward. Clearly, I haven't seen any details, but that leaves a big gap, doesn't it, of those people who are already in their later years who aren't going to be able to access any of that.
Yeah, I think that there are those who obviously it's as it were too late for them to start saving, and that's why you're going to need extra straightforward taxpayers' money as well as all of that. Because what I want to see this reform do is not just address the immediate problems, which of course are crucial, but also set up a stable and sustainable long-term system. So you'll have to do all of this at once. And the root of it is that we are all, one way or another, going to have to pay for this. And the reason it's difficult is that people, when confronted by this, as they were in, say, the 2017 election campaign, say, well, we don't want to pay any more for this. And I'm afraid it's going to have to be an act of political bravery to say, you are going to have to pay more for this if you want decent social care for yourself or for your parents or so on. Now, what's the best and fairest way to do that? That's where the debate should centre over the next few months.
Damien Green, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a controversial plan to introduce an amnesty for alleged offences by British soldiers who served in Northern Ireland before the Good Friday Agreement is expected to be confirmed in the Queen's speech today. Now, the timing coincides with the findings of an inquest due to be published later into the deaths of 10 civilians shot dead where members of the Parachute Regiment opened fire in Ballymurphy in 1971. Our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, reports.
It is a neighbourhood still haunted by the events of 3 days in August 1971. 10 civilians were killed when members of the Parachute Regiment opened fire in Ballymurphy. The dead included a Catholic priest, 2 teenagers and a mother of 8 children.
The last words my mummy said was, the army wouldn't shoot you, the army wouldn't hurt you, so she felt she was safe.
The victims' families say no one should be above the law.
She had bright red hair, she had a coat, sandals, a dress on. They could see very easily that she was a woman. And not only that, they fired at her, but the first shot was aimed straight at her face. Now, to me, that's personal.
Belfast was in uproar, the detention of IRA suspects without trial causing serious unrest. The army reported a gun battle in Ballymurphy, but none of the victims there was armed.
That's where Mrs. Connolly was going when she was shot, to help this young man crying out. The soldier walked over to him, the army officer, and executed him. He had a bullet behind each ear.
John's dad was shot 14 times. He's still campaigning for justice.
I thought I was a hardened campaigner until the evidence started coming out in court in detail. Post-mortem, things like that there, right? And it was really hard for all of us to sit through that there, really hard.
5 months later, the Parachute Regiment shot 14 people dead on Bloody Sunday in Londonderry. The battalion on duty in Derry had come from Ballymurphy. Had these shootings been properly investigated at the time, Bloody Sunday may not have happened 5 months later. In other words, what happened here set in motion a train of events that would come to be known as the Northern Ireland Troubles. The inquest findings are due on the very day the government's expected to confirm a halt to historical prosecutions. Author Brian Rowan has written extensively on how Northern Ireland might address its troubled past.
I think the only way out of this is an amnesty. That's the only way to truth or more information. It's the word we will not speak. It's too poisonous. But if we don't go there, then we aren't going to have a legacy process or a truth process. And with the wars over, we're going to spend the next 30 years fighting the peace.
It's not that they don't want to move on here, it's that their loved ones were never given that opportunity. David Blevins, Sky News in Ballymurphy.
World leaders have appealed for calm after days of violent clashes between Israel and the Palestinians. Rockets were fired towards Jerusalem by Palestinian militants. In response, Israel launched airstrikes into the Gaza Strip. Officials there say 20 people were killed.
There are very grave violations of international law occurring, that there is a disproportional use of force against Palestinians. All of the casualties, all of the deaths are Palestinian. It's not enough to say let's de-escalate, as if all of these Palestinian lives are not worth a pause at the very least, an expression of sincere regret and condolence. None of that is happening. And without consequence, let me just put it that way, without consequence for violations of international law, this trap will continue. This reality will not cease. And that's just untenable.
Well, let's talk to Hen Mazik, an Israeli writer and former Israeli Defense Force humanitarian officer. Good to see you this morning. All these world leaders now calling for calm. Will any of that be heard on either side, do you think?
I think that the situation right now is very emotionally charged. We are, right after Jerusalem Day. Nakba Day is coming this Saturday. So people are using it as an excuse to promote violence, unfortunately. And I think that we will see more violence coming, and it's coming from all sides. So I think at this point, the most important thing to do is to de-escalate and to stop the violence. The violence started last week with the murder of Israeli teenager, Yehuda Guetta, that was murdered by Palestinian terrorists, and his both friends were shot. So responding to what we heard before, the Israeli civilians have been the ones that were, going under rocket attacks and being shot. And yesterday we heard calls in Al-Aqsa Mosque to bomb Tel Aviv. So the situation is indeed very, very tense right now.
But, I mean, it is always a very difficult situation when we talk about the tensions between Israel and the Palestinians, but certainly from our correspondent on the ground was saying some of the skirmishes over the last couple of days around the Al-Aqsa Mosque seem to have been unprovoked, and the police force, the IDF, seem to be taking the lead on provoking some of that violence.
I'm not sure if the IDF was the one provoking. I think that once, these are not protests like protests that we're seeing in London or in America. These are violent protests. Yesterday, a Jewish man was almost lynched driving his car in Jerusalem by a mob of Palestinian activists that were throwing blocks on him. As I said, just a week before, Yehuda Guetta, a teenage boy, Israeli boy, was killed. And the situation has just escalated since then. The protests themselves are not just protests of, holding signs and chanting anything peaceful. It's violent protests using blocks, trying to harm civilians. And as we've seen overnight, my mom told me that rockets were barraged on Israel, over 200 rockets. And it's important that we look at those rockets for what they are. Each rocket is an attempt to murder Israelis. These are not just, imagine going into an audience in London somewhere with a gun and just shooting 200 times. The fact that we have the defense system like the Iron Dome that is protecting Israeli civilians doesn't mean that those rockets are not an attempt to murder. And Hamas also has a way to stop the violence in Gaza and stop the airstrikes of Israel. It's just called to stop shooting rockets. That's what they can do.
You talked in your first answer about the importance of de-escalation. That has to come from both sides. What can Israel do? What can the Israeli parliament do on the basis that, it does seem to be pretty unstable at the moment with the problems that Mr. Netanyahu is facing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Stephen. I think the Israeli government has taken a few actions, a few steps yesterday. First of all, the Sheikh Jarrah court decision that was supposed to come this week was postponed in 30 days to ease the tension. Jews were barred from going up to the Temple Mount yesterday morning, and I think today as well, Jerusalem Day Parade was rerouted, and instead of going through Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, it was rerouted to go through a different path to avoid tension. So Israel has taken steps to calm down the flames. But I think that what we're seeing is the other side, the Hamas in Gaza and the terrorists. I mean, it's not only in Gaza, also in Jerusalem. We saw that the rockets were accepted with cheers, and that has to stop.
Okay, Hen Mazzig, it is good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, let's have a quick look at the weather for you now with Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. We are seeing low pressure dominate the weather this week, so we continue with the unsettled theme of showers or longer spells of rain. This afternoon is going to be a case of sunshine and showers moving northwards, some heavy and thundery later across parts of northern and northeastern areas of England. And the southwest will also see some showers later, rain clearing northwards across Scotland.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.